Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's Artists in Conversation at the Brandywine Workshop and Archive. I would like to start by thanking our sponsors, Foreman Arts Initiative and the Philadelphia Foundation Artworks Grant, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Edna Andrade Fund at the Philadelphia Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation, Philadelphia's Cultural Treasure, Minutemen Press Philadelphia, PA Council on the Arts, Pico Energy, PA Humanities, the Dowdy Foundation, Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, the Studio Institute, Gerald Pogash Scholarship Fund, the Joyce de Guatemala Fund, Libby Newman Fund, the Linton Family Fund, the Bacon Fund, Acumen Inc., American Picture Framing, and the Friends of Brandywine. It's wonderful to have such support. We're very, very honored and lucky to have that make this event possible. My name's Marta Sanchez, and I'm the Special Projects Coordinator here at the Brandywine Workshop and Archive. Today, I have the pleasure of conversing with Hester Stinnett. Hester is a Philadelphia-based artist, and she earned her BFA from Hartford Art School at the University of Hartford, Connecticut, and an MFA from Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, Philadelphia. She is a professor of printmaking at Tyler. She has also taught at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts, Philadelphia College of Art, which is now the University of the Arts, and Bryn Mawr College, PA. Stinnett's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is in numerous private and public collections, including the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Walker Art Center, Minneapolis, and she was awarded a Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Fellowship for works on paper. She was an artist and resident at the Fabric Workshop, here at Brandywine Workshop and Archives, the Fleischer Art Memorial, all in Philadelphia. She's also presented printmaking workshops at the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts and the Anderson Ranch Art Center, Snowmass Village, Colorado, correct? Stinnett and artist Louis M. Johnson co-wrote Water-Based Inks, a screen painting manual for studio and classroom, published by the University of the Arts Press, with grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and Hunt Manufacturing Company. I'm so glad to have you here, Hester. You've been a wonderful friend and artist, mentor to me as just a fellow artist, and mentor to many young printmakers. So I'm just so happy to have you here.
Well, thanks, Marta. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I just want to go ahead and get started with all the things that we want to share. This Artists in Conversation is a part of the Refocus exhibition that's being citywide. There's so many exhibitions, and we wanted to participate by sharing some of the work by women. We have over 200 women artists in the show, in our collection. And we want to thank Ruth Fine and Gustavo Garcia for curating this exhibition from our collection. And I think it's just a wonderful display. I'm honored to be in the show. Hester's honored to be in the show. And we're going to be talking about that during this conversation. So I guess I want to start with this, Hester, and I want to ask you if you can please share your thoughts about experiences with the BWA residency and the work chosen for Refocus exhibition here at the Printed Image Gallery, and any other insights on this show you might want to share. So take your time and just share.
Thanks, Marta. Well, first, it's a real pleasure to be here back at Brandywine. And the Refocus, as Marta mentioned, is a citywide series of exhibitions that many art institutions are hosting that focuses on women artists and that reflects back on the first show that happened 50 years ago. And it's an opportunity to reflect on the original show, but also what's happened since. And I can only imagine how difficult it would have been for Ruth Fine and Gustavo Garcia to go through all of the prints and make choices. Because Brandywine, what's so impressive about Brandywine is how steadfast as an organization Brandywine is to the mission and vision of supporting diversity. And so as Brandywine looks back over 50 years, there's a rich history of women artists, but many artists from all different disciplines and backgrounds, many in underrepresented groups. So when you look back on the original focused show, and Brandywine can look at the 50 years hence and say 200 women artists have been here at Brandywine over the course of those years. So it just shows that kind of dedication and focus on the mission of Brandywine. And it's an honor to be in the show with so many well-known artists, and also as you walk around and take a look, you'll see that there are artists from all generations, from just a few years ago to a while ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about my print and the residency that I did in 1987, which has been a good while ago now. But that, I think, is a reflection on hopefully what this series of exhibitions is meant to do, is meant to help us as an art community in Philadelphia stop and think about those intervening years and what's been accomplished and what have arts organizations done to continue to support diversity across the board, and Brandywine is the leader of that. So it's a real honor, and I'm sure it was a challenge to go through those 200 prints and make the choice. So I'm very honored to be selected. If you want, I can start to talk a little bit about 1987 and my residency at Brandywine. At that point, I was fairly new to Philadelphia. I had graduated from Tyler with my MFA in 1982. When I graduated, I had said I will go wherever there is a teaching job, and fortunately that was right down the street at what was called PCA, Philadelphia College of Art, which is now the University of the Arts. And that got me started. As a young artist, I quickly learned about the difficulty of having your own studio as opposed to having access to a school studio with all kinds of great equipment. So I started to work primarily in woodcut. And the point that I want to make is that by the time I was invited to come and work at Brandywine in 1987, Brandywine also gives artists the opportunity to do something that they can't do in their own home studio. So I had made the adaptation of working primarily in woodcut, in black and white, and then when I received the invitation to come to Brandywine, it meant I got to try out offset lithography and work in color. So we'll go back to Cater Street in Philadelphia, and I just have a couple of slides. This is where you would put your proofs out after they came off of the offset press. But I want to start with a little bit of the work that I was doing. So as I mentioned, I was working with very large-scale woodcut. This is called Tower. It was 52 by 22 inches. And it may look like a landscape that I might have observed from life, but these were, the work from this time were all composites. So I might see part of a tree that I would like, or a skyline or clouds, but then I would take them and redraw them and compose them to create an invented scene. So here, this really tall tower of a tree, sort of just the trunk stripped bare, and the perspective of it, and then the clouds in the background is a total fabrication. The one thing about woodcut is that, for those of you who are printmakers know that when you're carving away the block. You can't go back and make a correction. You have to be fairly committed to what you're working on. Offset is a very different process. So this is actually a woodcut called hold, and it is, again, a composite of a tree, and what I was interested in is really the way that tree looked like a hand that could hold something. So again, this is a fairly large woodcut, 35 by 27 inches, and I would carve away the highlights and then make lots and lots of little cuts to make a gray tone. And this is the print that I wanted to revisit when I came here to Brandywine to work on an offset lithograph. One other part of your studio practice is that when you are making a woodcut, you're at home working on your table. It's solitary and you're cutting away. It takes a long time, and printing takes a really long time. And around that, in the late 1980s, when I was making these, Fresh Air was a 2-hour program, and All Things Considered, I'm sure, was 2 to 3 hours. So if I started at the beginning of Fresh Air and I rolled the ink on the block, by the time I got to hand printing them with a spoon, it took me all the way through to the end of All Things Considered. So that was usually, a 4, maybe 5 hour to get one print. It's very different with offset lithography. Offset lithography and the press that was on Cater Street here at Brandywine was a big, what's called a stream offset press. And this is, as you can see, Bob Franklin, the master printer, and he's dwarfed by that huge offset press. It was very vertical. All the rollers were up at the top. It's different from the press that's down in the current Brandywine workshop. And it was what's called a stream offset press. So the paper, you would have huge stacks, and the paper would just go flying through the press. You have to imagine the noise of a big automated press. It was kind of clickety-clack. It was like being next to a locomotive. And the speed of it. So it was all electrified, and the paper would go flying through the press, and you could have 100 prints in 5 minutes. And it was very different from being at your own studio, working at your own pace, which was to have this big press just rolling. And Bob was a very patient but efficient printer. And once the press would get rolling and fully inked, you didn't want to stop the press. The press needed to keep going. So that was a little bit of a culture shock of having to do all of the make ready and get your image all set and ready to give to the printer. And it took a long time to get the ink layers just right, because offset lithography has a very thin ink layer. And then you pushed the button and it was done in 5 minutes, and then it was back to you as the artist to make the next move, to make the next layer, to make the next decision. So what was fascinating about Brandywine was how you would have the support and expertise of someone who really knew what they were doing to guide you through that process. And Bob was a real master at that. He was excellent at working with artists and helping them really realize their vision. And this just gives you an idea. That's just a stack of my prints that have just come off of the press. And we were only going for 100, but there are at least 3 reams of paper there. It was kind of astonishing the amount of paper that would fly through that press just to get the ink up and going. Marta, did you work on the offset press?
I worked on one, but I worked on the one that they have now that is longer and not as tall. But I also had the pleasure of working with Bob, and he was just a wonderful person in his efficiency for printing. And also, he had to give me a tour of the archive to give me different kinds of ways to go about them. So I'm very honored to have been able to work with Bob.
And the offset press that you worked on, it was a little slower, right?
Right.
You could look at one proof and then think about it.
Yes.
And then make a decision or a choice.
He went through the whole thing, and I painted on Mylar, which was then transferred to the plate.
Right.
But he gave me gave me color theory as far as how colors will react, because I came in as a painter. And that's one of the wonderful things also about Brandywine, is that not only do they look for diverse artists that are printmakers, but also people that have never tried it before, and that are maybe of different disciplines, whether they're a sculptor, whether they're a painter. And so you go in thinking as a painter, and you come out learning all these different subtleties of how to make the colors richer with maybe just 4 colors, with transparencies and matte. So I had a week course with Bob.
Well, that's a big help. The one trick that I learned from Bob is once the press really got rolling and it was on one of the first layers, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's a little lighter than I thought. And Bob said, we'll just run it through again. and then it just went speeding through the press, and it just added just that slight layer that made the color just a little bit denser and a little richer. So that's an idea of how Brandywine was on Cater Street. That press took up the whole room. It was a much, much smaller studio. And I don't know how long Brandywine was there, but it was for years before moving to here on South Broad Street.
Right. Let's see. I don't necessarily. Gustavo would and Alan would be the first to tell you the years of when they moved over to this area, to this place. But I wanted to ask you about. Was it also? Did you also have to have a plate? The transfer was also like a Mylar?
Right. So it's the same process where the image would be drawn with some kind of black opaque material, but offset gives you much more gradation and tone, and then that would be photographically shot onto an aluminum ball plate and then attached to the press and run through the press. The other point that you were talking about, Marta, is how Brandywine works with a number of different artists from different disciplines. And it's great to be able to try something out that you haven't done before, and certainly something that you can't do in your own studio. And it turned out that the print that I made at Brandywine was based on the woodcut that I showed, but it was a chance to work in color, but also it was a chance for me to try out an idea that I'd been thinking about, but I hadn't really worked with before. So it starts out with a layer of kind of spring green and then the tan. And it was similar to the way that I would work on a wood block where it was all drawn or it was carved out. But the final layer that's on the top is a print from just a found board, a found wooden plank. And previously, I had always cut on wood where I had prepared it and sanded it, and it was a really pristine surface. But I'd really been thinking about the history that a material can bring with it. And this was an old used tabletop, and it had many scars and many dings in it. And as I inked it and then printed it on the Mylar, that was then shot onto the plate, you would see all of those dings, all of that history, all of those marks. And it really made me think about, again, the hand, that gesture, like holding. But the title of this print is called Fortune, and that's because I was thinking about that wood grain and the history and all of the marks as almost like being the way that you would read your palm, the way that you could look at your fate or your history. And I have a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that talks about the generations that when you look at your hand and you think about the generations of your family and the previous generations and how they are embodied within you. And that was some of what I was thinking about when I was working on that print. And for another aspect of Brandywine, there is the website, Artura, and this print and many of the prints are up on that website with all of that information and the quote and information that I wrote about that particular print. So it turned out that print and that use of the weathered, I'll call it, aged, historical wood layer, then that was a direction I really continued to move in. And I started to do less and less carving and more working with the kind of found blocks and all of that history. So that print was a real transition for me. I don't know, Marta, when you worked on your print, did it have a kind of lasting impact on what you were doing in your painting practice?
I think it did. But first, before I start with my work, I just want to say that I just really feel, after I seen your woodcut, I still feel that motion of form going onto the limbs, and I like how that transcended in that way. And I want to thank you for mentioning Artura, because there is just so much wonderful information to get deeper into each artist that could be shared with for educational purposes. And I want to encourage everyone to please visit Artura so you'll get to see more of the work that we have to offer everyone. My work did a real big leap, and that was because it's an acrobat. Fun. But it not only did it give me the opportunity to make a print, but in a painterly manner that Bob didn't try to change or make it rigid, but also, was able to give me that space. And the idea of printable works of art that can be sold and shared with many people. My work was about, and has been about train yards for a very long time since it's the same thing when you talk about the palm and the history. And I wonder if that's one of the aspects as women that we feel we have to have this eternal record of things. Not sure, I don't want to make a blanket, statement, but there's, at least for you and I, the idea of why I make the train yards is because that is my personal landscape, that is a landscape of my Latina community. And then there's the history of my great-grandfather that was a lion tamer who married a acrobat. So incorporating that a figure and doing it in a way that I could make multiples. And lastly was the fact that I was able to invite a poet, a Chicana Latina poet, to write around it and incorporate that. I thought that by doing that, and say, for example, the piece went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which it is, now maybe some more people will know not only about the visual of Latin Chicana artists, contemporary work, but also contemporary poetry. So you and I have an affinity to poetry and imagery. And I think the accessibility of the print and also the idea of painting freely on the mylar and making it as vivid as Bob would allowed me to become. So I'm very happy of that opportunity to do that. And because of that is why I'm here, because I believe in the mission of what Brandywine is.
And your print is a great example of all the kind of texture and tone that the offset can really capture, as well as the immediacy of the mark and the gesture. It's so painterly.
I think it's do you have one more to share?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about one of the other artists in the show.
Oh, definitely. We can see mine later at the end. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to mention that one of the other great aspects of Brandywine is once you're sort of a member of this community, that just like this show is curated from the archives, once you make a print at Brandywine, it gets included in all of these different shows and travels across the world, or as Marta was saying, it might end up in the Philadelphia Museum. Whoops, it's not. There we go. So I want to spend a few minutes to talk about another artist that's in the show, and if you're here, her work, Lois Johnson, is right around the corner as you entered. And Lois was a printmaker who I worked with at the University of the Arts. She was my colleague. This is a picture of Lois, and yes, she is standing in front of a herd of bison. She was a native of North Dakota and sort of brought the West with her when she came to Philadelphia. And what we were talking about earlier about working at Brandywine and being able to do something that you've never done before and being open to a new process or a new experience, that was something that when I started working with Lois at the University of Arts, I was teaching as an adjunct professor, they had a whole different way of screen printing that I hadn't really been exposed to. And so when you are able to work in a different studio or work at a different school or have that exposure, you want to continue to always be open to what processes and techniques and how other people use them. And so with Lois and the folks at University of the Arts, they had been working with, whoops, it's not, let me try one more time. It's not advancing. There we go. They had been working with offset lithography. I don't think there was ever an offset press that Lois didn't want to have. Mm-hmm. And this is Lois directing the movers to bring in a brand new big offset press to University of the Arts. And she was a very, very innovative printmaker and often went between offset lithography to silkscreen and then back again. I'll try advancing, but I may need okay, thank you, if you can advance it. And this is just another example of Lois's work. It's very similar to the piece that's up on the wall. And you can see that she was able to accomplish really beautiful, thin, vivid veils of color mixed with photographic information, and it might be a photo of Philadelphia City Hall mixed in with the prairie of North Dakota. So it was very autobiographical work, but it was also mixed together in a way that makes you really think about Robert Rauschenberg and his approach. So she would have areas of very intense color and then surrounded by more muted or darker colors. And again, these are all primarily mixes of silkscreen and offset, and she would always go back and forth between those two techniques. I'll just ask you to advance the slide. And then here's a final version that gives you a little clearer view of how she would incorporate photographic imagery into this kind of collage, gestural-like approach. Okay. The process that we really shared was an interest in silkscreen, and in the late 1980s, silkscreen used oil-based, solvent-based printing inks. And silkscreen was a very aromatic process. In the downstairs, in the flammable cabinet, there is an archival can of Sunny Boy silkscreen ink, and if you ever pop that open, you will get a whiff of just how strong those solvents were. And imagine teaching in a classroom full of 15 students, all using oil-based inks, because silkscreen came directly from the industry, from the commercial applications, and that's what was used in commercial applications. And it was a really toxic environment to teach in and to be in. Additionally, when you cleaned your screen, you cleaned with solvent-soaked rags that you stood at your screen with two wet rags against the mesh, and you rubbed like that, and your face was right there. So if that probably accounts for some of the brain cells that I've lost over the years. But what was going on at University of the Arts was that they were starting to work with water-based inks, which was a revelation to me. It was in the air. People were experimenting with it. It seemed like such a no-brainer, like why wouldn't you use water-based inks that are all acrylic? And then when you're finished printing, you would take your screen to the sink and just hose it out with water, and it was terrific. But people didn't know about it. People didn't know how to use the inks. It was a result of some of the changes in the federal EPA laws, the Environmental Protection Agency, for clean air and clean water. And so industry was starting to change, but schools on high school, middle school, up into college were still using the oil-based inks. So what I worked with on Lois was a way of first holding a lot of workshops where educators and individual artists could come and learn how to use the water-based inks, as well as then we collected all of their experience and data. It was kind of like consumer reports. We had all of these different brands, and people could try them. And we collected all of that information, and then with support from the NEA and University of the Arts and Hunt Manufacturing / Speedball, we put together a handbook that was first printed in 1985, and then we reprinted it in 1990. And it was distributed throughout the US to really try to help educators make this change, because it's very difficult when you're a teacher in your classroom and you want to use safer materials, but how do you get started? So we offered workshops. That's Lois teaching one of the demonstrations on how to use the inks. We had materials, and then participants made their own prints. And I just have one more slide.
That's fine.
And then the other aspect of the workshops and the way that we collected information, because people were very suspicious. You know, there were articles called "Why the Diluted Response to Water-Based Inks," because people didn't know how to use them, and you get used to using a material, and oil-based inks were beautifully opaque, and they never dried out in your screen, but they were so toxic. So what we did was we invited professional artists and professional printers to come. We invited Brand X Editions from New York to come down and work with Robert Stackhouse, a sculptor, and then I helped the printer Fran Spohn, and we together printed Pat Steer, the artist and painter Pat Steer, one of her prints. And so the test was, well, could it rise to that level? Could it work in a classroom with a range of students, and could it rise to that professional level? And 30 years later, I can say that through these efforts and the efforts of many others, I don't think there's a college out there that uses oil-based ink. And it's so much better for the students, and it's so much better for the environment. So that was something that I learned by going and working in a very different studio, and then saw the opportunity of how we could disseminate the information, because I think printmakers are always about spreading the word, right?
Indeed, indeed.
And I think your slide is next.
I want to just say how grateful I am for all that hard work, and I'd love to get one of those handbooks, you know, so.
Well,
Amazon?
no, you can go to my website and
Okay.
download it for free.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, everyone. Because I just always love this kind of information, and I know a couple of people. I'm looking at Amy Jarrett, who's a technician. She loves this kind of work, so thank you so much. We'll be able to download.
It's a little vintage, but the basics of screen printing don't change, and we still use the exact same ink. So there are some pearls of wisdom in there. So, I'll have to get a copy for you.
Thank you.
For everyone else, you can go to the website.
All right. How much time do we have? Like 30 minutes? 20 minutes? Okay. I think we're doing really well. I just love it. So this is the print I was talking about, R con R cigarro. And one of the things, I'll go ahead and read the poem just because I love to sing. R con R cigarro, R con R barril, que recio corren los carros del ferrocarril. Waiting for the train, lives comes to lives. Trains follow tracks leading to ends and beginnings. As we come and go from there to here, here to there, we know life as a railroad track leading to ends and beginnings. R con R cigarro, R con R barril, que recio corren los carros del ferrocarril. Coming and going, la vida es un tren, y los paseros viajan siguiendo de destino. Camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. The engine hums a lullaby, the reassuring whistle in the night. R con R cigarro, R con R barril, que recio corren los carros del ferrocarril. So that's the poem that Norma wrote around there. And I just wanted to share it because most of the time you see the image, but you don't really get the feeling. And that is a poem a song or poem that they teach kids to roll their R's, if you didn't notice. But I think that I want to just say one thing, as you mentioned, and it was so wonderful for you to take the time to share the work of Lewis's work. And that inspired me to want to share a little bit about Joyce Guatemala. Now, Joyce Guatemala, I want to just read really briefly some of the information on her. She was a Mexican sculptor and printmaker. And she studied at the Fine Arts of at the National University in Mexico City, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she was an active member of the Philadelphia Art Alliance, the Brandywine, the Institute of Contemporary Art, and served as president of the Fine Art Committee for Patronatos de Bellas Artes. And she created this work that is called Hunters for the Dawn and is in the collection of the Temple University. Well, when she passed away, in honor of Joyce de Guatemala and her efforts to have artists of diverse backgrounds, they created a fund. And the fund has made it possible for Latina artists to be able to make prints here. And just recently, it was expanded to the BIPOC women to make prints here. So I think we owe a lot to the family of Joyce de Guatemala. And I'll just go ahead and do a little PR on that fund. When anyone that is a part of the Joyce de Guatemala Fund residency, when they're a part of the residency, 50%, 50 of the half of the edition goes to the artist, and the other half goes to Brandywine. And those prints that are sold of the Brandywine from the Joyce de Guatemala goes back to the fund. And so we need to keep enriching that fund by purchasing works from the Joyce de Guatemala residencies, right? So that we can offer even more women artists, BIPOC women artists, the chance to experience what Hester and I have experienced. So that's just one plug on Joyce de Guatemala and her family and the fund. And we only have 6 minutes. How did that happen? I don't know. When we're having fun, it just goes.
Well, and also, if people have questions, we might want to.
Well, let us be selfish. I want to be selfish.
Okay, Marta.
And what I want to do is I want to say that not only am I really excited about the fact that I have Hester here having a conversation with us, but I'm excited to say that, oh, thank you, that she'll be exhibiting here with Ron Abrams in May. And it's called The Personal. Yes. The Personal is printed, am I correct?
That's right. That's right. So Ron and I were invited to share our work at the University of Guanajuato Museum in Guanajuato, Mexico. And it was on display starting in October, and then it just closed in January. And it was, Ron is a very distinguished printmaker who teaches at Denison University. And we share a link in that we work from personal archives. And the works that we put together for the show, it just seemed like it would be perfect to have here at Brandywine. So we're really looking forward to bringing a version of that show just next month.
Yes, I think it's going to be May 23rd.
Okay.
I think so. Now, just, wait for the newsletter to just confirm that. We're so excited. It will be in the Glass Gallery, the gallery in the other building. So please come to the show and bring a lot of friends. And we're going to be so happy to celebrate that. So now we have just a little more time, not much. So if you have any questions, go ahead. But I do want us to all make a toast. So get your glass of water or soda, okay? Ready after the question, all right? So any questions? Amy? Poking at you.
Well, I was just curious, when you were talking about the transition to water-based inks, was there something that was added to the water-based inks to make them more opaque, or was it layers, or what was there some little nugget there that helped with that transition?
So the question, just to repeat it in case folks didn't hear it, was about that transition from oil-based inks to water-based screen printing inks, and was anything done to the ink to give it a little more opacity? And certainly the folks that were working in industry, we're trying to make the water-based inks as durable and as opaque, and actually mimic oil-based inks as closely as possible, because that was what industry needed, and that was what everyone was accustomed to working with. So yes, there was more pigment added to it to give it a little more color saturation, and but it was really meant to compete and eventually replace the oil-based inks. So there was a real careful formulation of how the pigments were ground and then how they would lead to that color saturation. And that's one thing when you work on a project like this, that you get to talk to the chemist at Speedball who tries to figure all of that out to make the material as to meet those really high standards. And of course, they keep changing the formula to improve it and to help it not dry as quickly. So in the intervening 30 years, the ink and the product it's the same name, but sometimes the formula gets improved with new materials that come in.
I have another question also about one of the previous prints that you showed that combines the silkscreen with the offset printing. I think it was Lois's work. And can I just assume that the blocks of color were done with silkscreen and the photographic images were done with the offset, or the blocks of color with the offset?
I think with Lois's work, you can never assume anything. She toggled back and forth between those two media so fluidly that what you might think is offset could be a very, very transparent silkscreen. She did like to use opaque white, and that would usually be silkscreen. You couldn't get that kind of opacity in offset. But that's part of the puzzle, and what's so visually engaging when you look at a print in person, and as you think about how was that print made, how were those layers added one on top of the other, what peeks through and what's covered, and that interplay between real soft transparencies and dense opacities. So Lois was very improvisational in the way that she worked, and she would run things through the press, and of course, as you saw with the offset press, you ran many, many copies, and she'd pull some out and put them to the side and work on another and put silkscreen on top of it, and then she'd look at it and decide, well, it needed something else, and then it would go back into the offset. So sometimes she did both photographic images in offset and in screen printing. She pushed those boundaries. There was nothing that kind of defined the way that she would approach a print.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that. Those questions, Amy, they were very good. Thank you.
And that's one thing, we can go and we can look at that print that's in the exhibition and try to figure out how it was made. And that's something, certainly when I look at any print as an artist, you're always trying to think about how is it made, what layer went down first, what technique was used. Artists look very, very carefully at whatever images to get ideas from.
We can't help ourselves. We
Right.
We're just inspect, we look, and we just look at the process. Not only do we look at the image, but we just try to dig through all the layers.
Because the layers and all of the process is what makes the image and the concept visible. So you want to make sure that you have the balance of the layers that you want to effectively convey your idea.
That's true. Well, we have such a wonderful collection here of art, so we hope that everyone will come to see our refocus. The Brandywine was not able to participate in the original exhibition because they didn't start for another 4 years. So this is our contribution and our gratitude for the women that have been working with Refocus. We've come a long way. There was a time where when I was in the 70s and 80s, I didn't have any women role models for imagery, and let alone anything ethnic, as far as Latino art, African contemporary art. I didn't have that. It wasn't until I went to college that I started seeing a little bit and then getting involved with the Chicano movement, which had a really long history of silkscreen and woodcut when we think of the maestros from Mexico. But it took a long time. So I'm so happy to see the wide variety and vocabulary and issues and interests that women are voicing today. When you look around, you think about people from just all over the country. And it's just such a pleasure to have you.
And
so,
Marta, you should mention about your work being included in a very important museum collection.
Oh, the Cheech Marin Riverside Museum. Yes, I'm very, very grateful for his interest in my work and for making it a museum. We're still trying to get our work there in all museums listed as Chicano art, listed as a movement. It's hard. It's really interesting that they'll put me as, if I'm in a museum, that they'll have me as an American artist. When it's more than that, it's the movement. I thank Woodmere Art Museum for listing me as a Chicana. Okay, so that's just, I think when I first thought about art, women art, I thought about feminism. And then I thought about the dinner table. And so it was all about feminine shapes. And that was like the beginning of the language. And then it has grown and spread. What do you think about that, like 80s, when that was that kind of imagery that feminist art had started?
Well, there were that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
But there were so many different artists and women artists who were working in performance, in painting. It was just a time when boundaries were really being pushed, and it seemed like everything was fair game. So I think that there were a number of responses. You're talking about Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, but then there were other artists like Carol Lee Schneeman who were doing extremely provocative performances that seemed kind of anti-feminine. So there was a whole change of what was possible and what were ways to really examine what it meant to be a woman in society. So that, and just as when you look around the room here, there's so many different responses. It's hard to kind of characterize just one response or another, but it was a real, I would say, it was a very thoughtful and aggressive time where people, and especially women, were trying to put a lot of different types of imagery out into the conversation of the art world.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to, end this panel with that thought. And I want to have a toast. So everyone get your water or your soda or your glass of wine, because we're going to toast to Hester.
Oh.
Because Hester has done so much for Tyler School of Art, teaching, printmaking, and being just an active committee person, always helping always being there to mentor students and connect them to institutions like the Brandywine. Why, if it wasn't for Hester, our wonderful gallery director, Rowan McDonald, wouldn't be here, okay? So can we all toast to being so grateful?
Oh, well,
Thank you so much for
Well, thank
all that
you.
you've done. Cheers.
cheers.
Do you have a question?
I want to just follow up with the comments around women that were creating in the 80s and some of that, and especially around performance, and a lot of that was kind of, because we had been through both, 12 years of, 12 years of Republican Reagan and Bush, and their kind of attacks on women's reproductive rights. The country that was in that very, critical political period. And so I think a lot of that, work was a response to, self-autonomy.
Yes.
Well, absolutely, because artists have to be alert to what's going on around them. And you're working at a time, and you are impacted in one way or another. It may take a different form of response, but the first job of an artist is to be alert.
Yeah, we're the canaries in the coal mine.
Exactly. Okay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I wasn't expecting a toast.
Well, you've earned that. You have. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.